Finding Nemo is a film written from an adult point of view. It talks about adult problems, the adult worldview, and how adults relate to those younger than them. It's also one of the silliest films in Pixar's catalog, packed with childlike joy in every single scene. It is the ultimate expression of how Pixar uses tone to shape how a story plays out. I love how lighthearted and easygoing this film is. Not just because it's fun, obviously I like how fun this film is. That's great. It's because when you think about its setup and its main character, you don't think that's a recipe for wacky goodness. Like the opening scene of the film has the main character's wife and hundreds of unborn children be murdered. And then he becomes a humorless and worrying figure who's afraid to leave his house. Hooray, silly little movie about fish, how delightful. I'm having fun already. It's an interesting technique how Pixar structured the tone of this film, to open with the emotional low point as the backstory, and then pivot completely from there to lighter material. There's a part of me that wants to criticize the opening, as Coral isn't really much of a character overall. They just get her out of the way immediately, and she doesn't really get brought up that much. It's not like Marlin cries about Coral later on. I actually kind of forget that Coral was even in this picture sometimes. But the more I think about it, it's necessary because it immediately builds Marlin as the ultimate straight man of the film, and lets them build the tone against that. Marlin becomes a character haunted by his past, a character with a worldview that the ocean is not safe. He literally tells Nemo that at the beginning of the film. And if Marlin is the character that's supposed to learn and grow, then the emphasis has to be on softening the environment and portraying the ocean as being more safe than Marlin thinks. The ocean of Finding Nemo consists of sharks who think that fish are friends and not food, turtles willing to dole out helpful advice, and whales and pelicans who are willing to serve as transportation. This isn't to say that there is no danger in the ocean, because there is still stuff like the jellyfish and anglerfish scenes, but in terms of a general worldview, Finding Nemo takes a fairly optimistic and almost idealized stance. Let's contrast this by looking at the thematic sequel to Finding Nemo. And no, I don't mean Finding Dory. I mean the Pixar film with the most thematic elements in common. Finding Nemo is the bizarre version of The Good Dinosaur. They're almost mirror images of each other, taking similar themes and ideas and executing them in completely the opposite manner. They are both films featuring a father and son relationship that deal very heavily with how people overcome fear. They both deal with the concept of grief and send its protagonists into the wilderness in a journey of self-discovery. The Good Dinosaur is a little sadder, a little more bittersweet, and a little grittier. It is a film that puts its protagonist through a lot of crap, like a lot of it, and tells him that if he ain't a little scared, then he ain't living. It's a film about overcoming one's personal fear, and keeps its worldview squarely in the "oh god, the world is dangerous" camp. Finding Nemo takes the more optimistic worldview, with a higher emphasis on trusting others and believing in them. It's not just about Marlin learning his own sense of strength and getting over his fear, it's about Marlin overcoming his fear for others. Finding Nemo is the more interpersonal film of the two. The most successful thing that Finding Nemo does is tell a relationship story between two characters without having the two characters actually be together. This is ridiculously hard to pull off convincingly sometimes, and it's kind of amazing how this one came together. Now let's contrast this to Brave, another parent-child relationship story. That film has the advantage in that it can put Merida and Eleanor together for the whole thing, so they can learn and grow directly from each other. Finding Nemo separates Marlin and Nemo almost immediately, forcing Marlin to learn how to trust and believe in his son without actually being with him. Instead, Pixar employs a series of foil characters and situations to serve as a surrogate for Nemo. Every character Marlin meets along the way is meant to be a reflection on his relationship with his son. Obviously, Dory is the biggest example of one of these. If you want to learn how to write an effective foil character, just look at Dory. You have a neurotic and humorless protagonist in Marlin, who is permanently haunted by his past, so you pair him with an easygoing and fun character like Dory, who basically can't remember anything from her past. This includes where her family is, by the way, a very clever little foreshadowing to the actual sequel of the film. The Marlin-Dory relationship ends up paralleling the Marlin-Nemo relationship. The short-term memory loss thing is particularly clever and effective, not just because of how it contrasts with Marlin, but because of how it links to Nemo as well. Marlin rationalizes in his brain that Nemo isn't able to do anything because of his lucky fin. It gives Marlin a reason to stay in his worldview that the ocean is not safe, and to not let Nemo actually do anything. Dory's forgetfulness is treated the same way. When she is explicitly told to swim through the trench and not over it, Marlin refuses to listen to her, because he just can't believe in someone with short-term memory loss. There is still a lack of trust there. In addition to being fun and amusing, Dory's absent-mindedness serves as an important pacing tool in their relationship. Dory kinda steals every single scene she's in, thanks to Ellen DeGeneres' delightful vocal performance. Whether it's her just giving a testimonial with a bunch of sharks, playing with a baby jellyfish, or just cheering up Marlin in general. Pairing her with an Albert Brooks character is a stroke of genius. They're so interesting to listen to, their banter really keeps things moving. Like in the sequence where they go to the deep dark area of the ocean, they literally hold on blackness for something like 15 to 30 seconds. Just blackness. In an animated film. They can do something like this because they know how good these two are together. I want to hear them argue about Dory's conscience. I want to see them debate about whether Dory can speak whale. I want to see them play a guessing game with a school of fish. Speaking of which, it's worth noting that Finding Nemo is an extremely episodic film. It's probably the most episodic Pixar film, really. After Nemo gets lost, it becomes a bit of a road trip movie, where they move from one location to the next, never ever looking backwards. There's no character chasing along after them, no overarching story lurking in the background. The idea is to tell a quick little parable, a quick little reflection on Marlin's character, and then move on to something else. The sharks, as an example, kinda zigzag the dangerous ocean theme at the beginning. They initially subvert Marlin's worldview by turning them into lovable and affable sea predators. It establishes that Dory is a generally trusting character who sees the best in people. But when it goes south, it reaffirms that Marlin is right to at least be a little cautious. A similar thing happens with the anglerfish. Marlin and Dory's first two encounters are where the ocean is at its most aggressive. The distinction is, and this is probably the biggest difference between Finding Nemo and The Good Dinosaur, is that these danger scenes are primarily played for laughs. You get the other sharks constantly apologizing for Bruce's insanity. You get Dory frustratedly trying to read the goggles while Marlin panics in the background. Even in the jellyfish scene, Marlin is forced to frame the situation as being a fun racing game. There is danger in the film, yes, but the emphasis is more on wacky fun rather than being legitimately scary and/or threatening. Probably the most important sequence in the film is their encounter with the whale, as this becomes the tipping point for Marlin's character arc. I love how they directly link the scene with the jellyfish sequence, by paying special attention to Dory's scars. They're a nice visual indicator to both Marlin and the audience of what happened earlier when he didn't trust her. Marlin can finally take his first little step forward toward not being so controlling, and then putting it to the real test afterwards when Dory asks Marlin to let go. This is also the scene where Marlin explicitly links Dory and Nemo together, telling her that you think you can do these things, but you just can't. While I do like this scene in general, I admit that it's a bit too on the nose for my tastes. Just the concept of Marlin figuratively and literally needing to let go in this scene, and then explicitly calling Dory Nemo by accident. I think showing their work is probably the right call here, since this is a film for all ages. It just irks me a little that they don't allow the audience to connect these dots ourselves. Finding Nemo is a very, very direct kind of film. The kind of film that just tells you what it means. And while I can appreciate its straightforwardness, it does sometimes lack a bit of subtlety with its moralizing. I've used the word parable to describe several of the vignettes, but that is sometimes how they come off. They're very specific little cautionary tales, with a very explicitly detailed message. Characters will directly sum up Marlin's issues to him, and tell him exactly how he needs to change. Like earlier in the same scene, Dory literally articulates that not letting anything happen to Nemo is no fun for the boy. Maybe I've seen this film too many times and the subtlety has just been sucked out of it. It's just that Finding Nemo sometimes feels like it's more interested in being a clean film than a nuanced one. Like it's awe-inspiring how competent it is in every facet, it just doesn't really do anything unexpected. There are no giant swerves in the lessons learned. Anyway, we've kinda glossed over Nemo's actual role in the story so far, so this is probably a good place to back up and revisit him. I mentioned in my Toy Story 2 review how it's structured similar to Finding Nemo, how they split the story in half. Except in this example, the supporting character is the one in the bottle, and the protagonist is the journey character. While I wouldn't say that Nemo's experience in the tank is pointless, it most certainly isn't the main thrust of the film. Finding Nemo is Marlin's film. It is about him. Nemo himself doesn't have as big of a character journey to go on. He lacks a bit of confidence at first, due to his father's constant worrying, but he doesn't exactly share his worldview. Nemo is actually interested in going off to school, interested in seeing the drop-off, and is willing to defy his father to prove a point. His main thing is that he claims that he hates his father. It all goes back to his father. The crew that Nemo hangs out with is absolutely fantastic. Love these guys, all of them. I kinda wish they would get their own film, just because they are such a fun crew. I love Brad Garrett's pufferfish and Allison Janney's starfish. The weird Bubbles guy, that crazy fish with her sister Flo, that guy obsessed with cleanliness. These guys are nice because they're a constant presence in the film. Marlin and Dory drift from one place to the next, with very little character continuity. I like that these guys stick around for most of the film, and we can play off of variations of jokes for them. I love the grandiose performance of the pufferfish during their Mount Wanahakalugi initiation. Shark bait hoo-ha-ha indeed. And then there's Gil. Let's talk about Gil. I think Gil's presence in the film is kind of fascinating, and is sort of the link that ties the whole thing together for me. We talked about earlier how Pixar consciously chose a foil character like Dory to accompany Marlin on his journey. So in dumping Nemo into a tank, they need to pair him with a character as well. And they chose Gil. But Gil isn't necessarily a foil character for Nemo, not in the traditional sense. In fact, they go out of their way to link the two characters together. They're both from the sea, and they both have the same damaged fin. Gil explicitly tells Nemo that his fin has never stopped him before. I think what's clever about Gil is how they drop the foil for Marlin into Nemo's storyline. Gil becomes a sort of father figure in the tank, used as a contrast for Nemo's actual father. Gil, much like Marlin, is one of the few serious characters in the film. But unlike Nemo's dad, he is constantly pushing the boy, constantly encouraging him to try things himself. When Nemo gets stuck in that tube thing, Gil talks him through how to swim out of it, the opposite of his father's approach. The message is immediate that Gil represents a different sort of parenting or encouragement style. Now granted, Gil's quote-unquote parenting style is viewed through the lens of his own self-interest. Obviously, Gil is interested in Nemo because he wants to escape the tank, and that's it. You notice, though, they're really careful to avoid making Gil an actual villain in the story. When their initial filter plan goes awry and Nemo is crying in fear, Gil actually backs off. He immediately feels remorse, apologizes, and doesn't push Nemo further. Gil comes off as being not only a self-interested character, but a responsible and sympathetic one. He ultimately puts himself in danger to save Nemo, and helps him flip into the drain. Gil is the fatherly sort of figure in the Nemo storyline, who is just trying to do his best for the kid in his own different way. Now, Marlin gets his own version of Gil to interact with. In his case, it's Crush the Turtle. Not Mr. Turtle, that's his father. Crush is obviously an awesome character in his own right. Like a giant surfer turtle doling out the wisdom, that's really cool. And all the turtle kids are super adorable with how they interact with Marlin and Dory. Crush, much like Gil, is the character who lays out all the advice. He's the one in the Marlin storyline pushing the narrative that kids will be ready to try things themselves. When they know, you'll know. It's an important step in Marlin's character progression, as he finally begins to enjoy himself as well. I admit, I find the final act of this film kinda weird, and I can't precisely pinpoint why. Because everything in the harbor generally works. I love Nigel as a character, and that flying scene is really fun. I like how they characterize Darla as well, as this aggressively annoying Elmira sort of kid. I like how Finding Nemo, similar to the original Toy Story, doesn't give us a traditional villain. The human characters do quote-unquote villainous stuff, but they're more like a force of nature in this kind of film. Yelling at Darla for being awful is akin to yelling at a tornado. Darla's just gonna do what she's gonna do. She doesn't know what's going on. I think part of the weirdness of the final act is how they handle the filter thing and how they link to the ending. The filter scheme is given a lot of attention, but ends up not being a thing at all. It ends up being more of a character growth thing instead. The thing they hang their hat on is Gil instructing all the fish to swim down when Nemo is being scooped out of the tank. This is the element that rears its head again when Dory gets stuck in the fishing net. It strikes me as weird that they devote all that time on the filter, but then take away this random, innocuous thing as the callback. This is really where they start leaning on their dramatic irony too, as Marlin inadvertently thinks that his son is dead. I don't know, this is the point in the film where I'm kinda looking at my watch, just waiting to see them get together already. It's getting kinda late in the film, guys. This isn't an American Tale. That being said, you don't have the dramatic irony, you don't get the Dory speech. And the Dory speech is amazing. It's probably one of the best line readings in Pixar's entire history. Ellen absolutely nails this thing, and on her second take no less. You notice that it's always the silly characters who really get you with these kind of moments. The whole film had been so Marlin-centric, so focused on his journey, that you kind of forget what the whole thing means to a character like her. I like that they flipped the tables around, and took the time to highlight what Marlin brings out in Dory. It's nice. Marlin and Nemo do eventually meet up, and we get our payoff of all the lessons the characters have learned. Thanks to Gil, Nemo now has the self-confidence to believe in himself and act on a plan. And thanks to characters like Crush and Dory, Marlin is able to let go and believe in his son. And they even get the "just keep swimming" mantra in there too. It's another really episodic and self-contained scene, but it's hard to debate that it doesn't check off all the boxes in this film. For me, Finding Nemo has always felt like the quintessential Pixar film. It's definitely the entry I would recommend to someone who had somehow never seen one of these before. It's just such a clean film. It has everything in it that you would associate with the studio. Its whimsy, its sense of adventure, its willingness to be a little silly and ridiculous. But I think it's a film with a good deal of heart as well, and deals with a subject matter you don't see in animation that much. The coming-of-age story is fairly common for this genre, and it's refreshing to see the mirror reflection of it, highlighting the adult perspective, the support your son and let him get there aspect. No one would really say that Finding Nemo is a film for adults specifically, however, despite its subject matter. Even for kids who, on a personal level, can't appreciate the parental struggle Marlin goes through, the story is written broadly enough for everyone to get it. It lacks subtlety sometimes for sure, but I can appreciate a plot that shows its work. Finding Nemo is a very workmanlike and studious film in this regard. I think there are other Pixar films that are deeper, more complex, and more nuanced, but there are very few that are more fun. It's one of those you put in when you want to relax and have a good time. And in the end, aren't these films supposed to be about having fun? If a guy like Marlin can come out of this thing with a smile on his face, surely it has to be doing something right. Thanks for watching.